Ministry of Water and Irrigation in Egypt to officially open the session. Dr. Imam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Amgad. And actually, I'd like to thank FAO Egypt for this very successful activity, which is water accounting. And now we have our session about dealing with water scarcity using accounting and auditing. Actually, with FAO, we started here in Egypt to build the water accounting unit, and we start a good activity. We have some result. Sure, we need to define the result and more discussion, but today we will have the chance to see other cases outside Egypt and how we can enhance the result, how we can differentiate between water accounting and water auditing. And I'd like to congratulate FAO for this very important activity, which is launched in many countries in MENA region with the help of FAO, and would like to continue. So I will give the floor to you, Dr. Amgad, to facilitate the session and also to let us know more about the two cases that will be presented during the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Imam, for that nice introduction for the session and officially open. Before we start the technical one, I just wanted to remind all the participants and the attendees to use the chat box or Q&A to post your question for our presenter, and we'll take them from there. And with that, I would like to invite Mr. Charles Batchelor to start with us to give us the first talk and introduce the concept of water accounting and auditing. Mr. Charles, he's an independent consultant with FAO, and he's based in London. Mr. Charles, he used to be working at UK Center for Ecology and Hydrology, and he took the task to establish and leading actually the agro-hydrology research group at the center. He's currently working with FAO as a consultant and on that funding project by CEDA that looking at implementing the 2030 agenda on water efficiency, productivity, and water sustainability in the MENA country. Mr. Charles, the floor is yours.
Amjad, thank you very much. Thank you, Ayman, as well. And good afternoon to everybody who's participating in this event. Could you move to the next slide, please? I don't have control over the slides. Can somebody move to the next slide?
So, Jiro, can you move the slides next?
Actually, that's Mohammed Salah being the.
Okay. Mohammed?
Okay. I also have the control as a host. Yes, okay. I do that then. Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Please go.
Okay. Could you move to the next slide, please?
Okay.
So on the screen now.
Charles, do you see the definition of water accounting?
We only see the first slide. Yeah, with the title and the name of Charles.
Yeah, I can't move it.
Okay. Now let me switch the presenter. Okay, Mona is gonna try. So I'll give it to make presenter. Yes.
Yes, we can see now the slide, but not in the slideshow mode. Yes, now it's in the slideshow mode. Yep, great. Mr. Charles, please proceed.
Okay, yep, great. Right, I'm going to divide my presentation into three components. I'll start with an overview of water accounting and auditing concepts and terminology. I'll then highlight some of the differences in return flows at the field and basin scales. And then I'll finish off by giving some of the reasons for adopting and using water accounting in countries that are facing increasing water scarcity. Can we move to the next one, please? Yeah. So what is water accounting? In its simplest form, water accounting can be defined as the systematic quantitative assessment of the status and trends in water supply, demand, accessibility and use in specified domains. Next slide, please. Yeah, typically, water accounting considers both water supply and demand. On the supply side, we consider water resources. That's the availability of rainfall, surface water, groundwater, and unconventional water resources in space and time. We also typically consider the water-related infrastructure and its capacity, condition, the operation and maintenance of water supply, storage, and treatment infrastructure. Often in more scarce areas, we consider leaks from infrastructure and the unauthorized diversion or withdrawal of surface and groundwater. On the demand side, typically we consider the demands for water for different uses and users in space and time, and the extent to which these demands are satisfied. And often we consider the patterns of consumptive water and non-consumptive water use. Next slide. With this slide, I just want to highlight the differences between consumptive and non-consumptive water uses, or fluxes, flows, and pathways. When water is diverted and used for agriculture and other uses, a fraction of the water used is no longer available for reuse locally or downstream because it has evaporated into the atmosphere. This fraction of water use is referred to as the consumed fraction. The consumed fraction comprises of both beneficial consumption and non-beneficial consumption. The fraction of diverted water that is not consumed is referred to as the non-consumed fraction, or the return flow in many cases. This fraction comprises of recoverable water and non-recoverable water. Differentiating between consumptive and non-consumptive water use is an important part of water accounting. And often it leads to very interesting debates and discussion between key stakeholders, in which they identify what their views on what is beneficial consumption and non-beneficial consumption. Next slide, please. A lot of factors influence the fractions that I've just mentioned. Amongst these, water scarcity can influence the relative magnitude of water fractions. For example, farmers are more likely to improve irrigation efficiency and productivity and maximize beneficial consumption when water is scarce and when they actually feel water scarcity themselves. Less positively, unauthorized diversion and withdrawal of surface and groundwater often increases when water is scarce and demands are not met. Next slide, please. And I just want to talk a little bit about return flows at the field and farm scale. In these two schematics, we're looking at the effects of improved irrigation scheduling on a simple groundwater-based. Don't go forward, back again. A simple groundwater-based irrigation system. In scheme A, you can see that the return flows are high. This is because the irrigation water exceeds the crop water requirements. And I think if you can see my pointer, you'll see that the return flows are, in this case, are quite significant, and they involve drainage into a drainage canal and percolation into a shallow aquifer. In B, we see that after improvements in irrigation scheduling, we see that there's been a decrease in the return flows as a result of improved irrigation scheduling. The evapotranspiration, or or the consumptive use has not changed. But the significant difference is this reduction in return flow. And we can expect in a situation like this, there will be benefits will include a reduced cost in groundwater extraction, and depending on the source of energy, there will be a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions as linked to using as a result of pumping water. Next slide, please. Okay, this schematic represents a cascade of return flows at the basin scale. This example is taken from Jordan, and it represents the return flows that take place from inflows in water in Oman, and then water that is recovered and reused 4 or 5 times between Oman and the Jordan Valley. We can use water accounting and auditing to analyze this cascade and look at the impact of this reuse and recovery and reuse of water on the net benefit of water use on each recovery and reuse, or of the cascade as a whole. What, of course, is interesting in Oman is that Oman is as a city, so most of the water use is non-consumptive. So that water is then used for other uses down the system. So starting with a non-consumptive water use is one way of ensuring that you get a high net benefit from water use at the basin scale. Of course, there are some drawbacks with cascades. At each reuse and recovery and reuse, there's likely to be a deterioration in the water quality, and data availability for this sort of analysis is often limited. Next slide, please. What is water auditing? Water auditing goes one step further than water accounting by placing trends in water supply, demand, accessibility and use in the broader context of governance, institutions, public and private expenditure, gender, legislation and the wider political economy of water in specified domains. Because this is a short presentation, I'm afraid I'm going to have to point you to the FAO's Water Accounting and Auditing Sourcebook for additional information on this, and flag up the fact that there will be a new guide on governance analysis that will be published by FAO soon. The aim of this guide is to support the adoption and use of water auditing and water governance in the NENA region. Next slide, please. I'm going to skip this slide because I can see my time is running out. But I would like to make the point here that water accounting and auditing are mutually supportive, and it's my recommendation is always to use water accounting alongside auditing when possible. Next slide, please. Just a quick run through this list of broader objectives of water accounting and auditing. These include to generate evidence that informs decision making. It's to make effective use of information from a wide range of conventional and unconventional sources using both remotely sensed and ground-based data. It's to identify and quantify potential trade-offs that result, or unintended consequences that result, for example, from policies aimed at agriculture intensification. The aim of the analysis also is to take explicit account of uncertainties and at the end of the process to make sure that outputs are communicated in user-friendly forms and formats, including interactive dashboards and visualizations. Next slide, please. Okay. Why adopt and use water accounting and auditing? In my view, one of the main reasons is that better information alone will not solve water problems in the Middle East and North Africa. But information is essential for effective management and governance of the region's scarce resources, as highlighted in the map on the right. And I'd also argue that adoption and use of interoperable and user-oriented water accounting and auditing now will help countries in the region prepare for a warmer and possibly an even drier future if climate change predictions are to be believed. Next slide, please. So I'd just like to acknowledge that the work that FAO is doing in the eight NANA countries is funded by Swedish SIDA. The next slide, please. And just thank you all for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Charles, for that nice introduction of the concept of water accounting and auditing and respecting the time. You're doing great on time. I think we still have a few minutes before our next speaker. I would like to use that opportunity to give you a question about, you have highlighted the importance of the consumptive and non-consumptive use definition. So how would you interpret this at the farm level? So what could be the consumptive and non-consumptive to bring the concept more to our audience?
Consumptive at the farm level, the consumptive fraction would split into beneficial and non-beneficial use. So beneficial use would be the evaporation or transpiration from the crop. Non-beneficial use would typically be the water use or water consumption of weeds. In terms of the non-consumptive use, there's the recoverable, which was shown in the slides that I showed, that recoverable water from deep percolation is possible locally and at the basin scale. Non-recoverable would be if the water goes to a polluted aquifer where it's uneconomic to treat and use that water. Or it may be so saline that it cannot be used.
Thanks, Charles. And we have a question here also from the participants asking about which countries in the MENA region adopt water auditing. And maybe if you can also explain how to move from water accounting to water auditing, or how they complement each other.
I don't think none of the countries have actually adopted water accounting. There is some work that has started in Jordan on water accounting. As part of water accounting that we've been doing, we have actually sort of strayed into using some of the carrying out activities that you would normally do as part of water auditing. So we've looked at we've analysed the key stakeholders. We've done institutional mapping. We've done policy mapping, but under the heading of water auditing rather than accounting. I mean, so we didn't have the funds or the resources to actually do accounting and auditing in parallel, which I think is ideal. So it looks like we're going to do it more in sequence. But to get this off get this off the ground, you actually need a team with has the relevant societal experience in economics or in institutional development and so on, or gender, for example. So it's work in progress across the eight countries. But there will be a presentation later in this today's event where you'll get a very good insight to what auditing can offer in addition to water accounting.
Thanks, Charles. And I totally agree with you. And with the water auditing, so there is a framework now has been developed by FEO, and that will be pilot in the region in Lebanon and Jordan too.
Yeah.
And as you said, also we'll hear from Julie later about the water governance or the part of water auditing in Palestine. So with that, I would like to move to our next speaker, Dr. Maruz Mol. She's a water resource management expert at IHE Delft Institute for Water Education in Netherlands since 2002, and currently she is managing the water accounting and crop water productivity team at IHE. Before going back to IHE, she was with Amy, our former colleague, from 2013 to 2018 as a research scientist based in Accra, Ghana. Dr. Maruz, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amgad. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm presenting also on behalf of my colleague, Poulat Karimi. And we were asked to show a little bit on how water management decisions can be informed by water accounting information.
Can you put your camera on, Maruz?
I tried before and then it crashed, so I'm a bit afraid of trying that.
All right, no worries.
I think I can skip this slide. This is also the definition of water accounting that Charles also presented. So this is a systematic acquisition and analysis and communication of data, and especially the geographic domain is important, where we're looking both at agricultural systems as well as river basins. So I would like to give a bit of an impression on how this information and these kind of data sets can be used in this IWM planning cycle. So I'll highlight a few elements and a few examples of how our water accounting studies in the Litany River Basin in Lebanon could support some of these steps in this IWM planning cycle. So the water accounting is, there are a number of frameworks that were developed over the years. This is a diagram from one of my PhD students on how water accounting frameworks have developed over the years. And it looks at both flow accounting, but also depletion accounting. And that's really related to what Charles was also explaining about the consumptive water use and the return flows. And they've been developed for different types of systems at different levels, from agricultural systems to country level systems such as the CAOA from the United Nations. And I'm going to particularly highlight one application that IHE Delft has developed in close collaboration with the partners, International Water Management Institute, as well as FAO. And that is applying water accounting using data from remote sensing and other open access databases on river basins. So the type of information that this Water Accounting Plus provides, it generates a general overview at river basin scale of how much water is available, is it being overexploited, or is there sufficient water available, how much is being managed through managed water use, such as irrigation, hydropower, and dam management, versus unmanageable flows, for instance, evaporation in the upstream catchments. How much of the water is exploitable, how much is being utilized, and how much is still utilizable. So it provides all these kind of indicators at a basin level. It also provides information on how much of the ET is from rainfall and how much is what we call incremental ET, and you can think about that as the amount of water that's evaporated from, for instance, irrigation application. Also, there's a bit of a trick also, for instance, for forests, which draw very tall trees can also draw water from groundwater sources, and that can also sometimes be considered as an incremental evaporation. And it also differentiates between the ET from the different land use classes with different management strategies. So they've identified a number of land use classes that have different ways of managing the water fluxes in these management classes. And it also can track surface and groundwater fluxes, and it can also track this water supply and return flow through some small models that are fed by the remote sensing information. And then they're provided in these sheets. You see the sheet in the top right corner, which has all these indicators presented in overviews, which can be either 1 year or over a period of years. So the example where we applied this water accounting framework, and I will show you a bit the results and how they fit in this planning cycle, is the Litany River Basin in Lebanon. This is a very important basin of the country and also in the region that provides water for agriculture in the Bekaa Valley, which is almost 50% of the irrigated area in Lebanon. It also provides water for an agricultural system along the coastline. It also provides hydropower production. About 10% of the energy demand is provided by the hydropower production from water from the Litany, and it also provides a significant amount of domestic water use for Beirut. In general, there is sufficient water, but there was a very recent, very strong drought in 2014. Which really affected a number of water users in the basin, and it also shows the challenges in trying to meet these water demands. In addition, there's also major issues with regard to water quality, and a lack of functional wastewater treatment plants has been identified as one of the major sources. And then also since the Syrian crisis, there are also a lot of Syrian refugees that are in the area that are also using the water and providing having an extra demand on the water resources. So the first link to the planning cycle is the water resources issue assessment. So this water accounting and information that we generate can actually provide information on the water resources issues assessment. So for the Litany Basin, the analysis showed that there is a renewable water resources for a period of 6 years of around 600 million cubic meters of water. But we also see that there is a long-term storage depletion, and that's also confirmed by what we hear from partners on the ground that say that the groundwater levels are going down, especially in the Bekaa Valley. We also see that about 30% of the available exploitable water is being utilized outside the basin. So, for instance, for the hydropower production, and also diverted to domestic water supply in the of Beirut. And in addition, so you would actually think that there is sufficient water, or a lot of water still available to be further utilized, but a large part of that water is also polluted, and the majority has such high pollution levels that they're actually they're not good enough to be made available for other water consumers. And an estimate of the environmental flow requirements is also not being met, considering all these elements. So you already see that this is quite a stressed basin, both in water, but there is sufficient water available, but the quality is of major concern. But also, if you look at individual years, this is not really the case. That it varies between the years, so you can provide this kind of information. The second stage where we can see the use for the water accounting plus information is the reflection or the evaluation of water resources policies and strategies. So evaluating whether or not there is sufficient water in the long term for instance, constructing a dam or expanding irrigated areas. So in Litany Basin, since the 1970s, there's a long list of planned projects that they have in the pipeline, or they still have on the planning cycle. They say, okay, we want to increase the water supply to the irrigation system in the Bekaa Valley. There's talk about diverting more water for Beirut. There's some interbasin transfers for domestic and irrigated land. But the question, of course, is there sufficient water in the river basin to actually supply these developments? So even, not even thinking about the quality, but is there sufficient water available? So the analysis actually showed that although on the long term, the last to 2010 to 2016, we see that there's sufficient water available, but during dry years, there's actually not sufficient water to supply the demand that is requested for these new developments. And we actually see that in 2014, already there was a major issue for the hydropower, which was at a standstill, without even these developments. Also, because we've analyzed it for the whole Litany Basin, some of the water that is being generated downstream of the Karun Dam is considered in the analysis. So we should actually redo the analysis with only the upstream of the dam to analyze how much water is available. And we also know from our partners that the diversion of one of the interbasin transfers was also halted because of lack of water quality. So there are a lot of issues. So we see that on a general system, there is sufficient water, but there are some major challenges if you want to consider these developments and whether or not there's sufficient amount of water quality and quantity to accept these developments. So the last element of the planning cycle that I would like to highlight is the monitoring and evaluation, which I think is a very strong component of the Water Accounting Plus framework, to monitor and evaluate what is happening with the investment and the plans. So some things that I would like to highlight here, for instance, we can, with the Water Accounting Plus, we can identify how much of the water is being consumed by the agricultural sector. We see that almost 300 million cubic meters of water is evaporated just from the agricultural sector, so that's a significant amount of water. A large part is from groundwater, and some studies also done by some of our students showed that the estimations that we had are consistent with the groundwater model and also the depletion of the groundwater. So there's a lot of linkages between the data of remote sensing and what we could find from the models. And another example of what we can monitor and evaluate, for instance, is water productivity. So we did calculate the crop yields and water productivity for a number of crops in the Bekaa Valley. We also see that the irrigated crops, so the areas where there was irrigation, they've got higher yield but lower water productivity than the rain-fed crops. And we see that, for instance, in a dry year, the yield decreased, but the water productivity increased because they consumed less water because it was less available. And we see also that, for instance, for wheat and potatoes, that there is potential to increase water productivity because it's still below the global average. So to conclude, we see that this water accounting can provide a lot of data and information for various stages of the water resources planning cycle. And especially what we're working on is how to use the Water Accounting Plus and the remote sensing data. It can really help in quantifying land-based water consumption and estimating water productivity. Before I finish, I would also like to acknowledge not only the FAO CDAP project, but also the FAO project on using remote sensing in support of solutions to reduce agricultural water productivity gaps, also called the WAPOR gaps, of which supported the development and the publication of the water accounting in the Litany River Basin that provides all the examples and the data that I presented as an illustration in this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Malroos, for that insight about water accounting information and how it can be used to inform different decision process. We have few questions. Fiona was still with time, so allow me to bring it to you. The first question is from Dr. Assam Nofel. He's asking about how would you decide about the percent or the quantity of environmental flow requirements?
Okay, so we're trying to use not only remote sensing data, but we also use other open access databases. So for the environmental flow requirements, we use a data set that Vladimir Smartin, also from EMI, had developed. So we're using an environmental flow database to estimate that. We do realize that if we have better information from the ground, that would be better to include that. But for now, that's what we used to estimate the environmental flow requirements.
Thank you. And the following question coming from Dr. Marie-Hélène Nassif from Lebanon. She's asking about in Litany Basin case study, what project actually diverts water to Beirut from the basin?
Yeah, so there is, from the lake, there is a diversion through a number of hydropower stations that also supplies some domestic water to one area in Beirut. And the plan, or at least the 1917 plan, also accounts for diverting more water to Beirut and to supply more water for the domestic consumption there.
Thank you. And another following question. How do you see the uptake of that information from water accounting to inform the management decisions in different countries or different case study you have?
Yeah, so with the Litany, we actually have a good contact with the Litany River Authority. And they're really supportive of the analysis because it also confirms, numbers and values that they know from the ground. So that was we had a very nice discussion about that. I think the challenge here is with what Charles also was talking about is the governance. Like where does how does this information translate to the ministries and them taking up this kind of information? Because if you see, they still have this 1970-year-old plan, but it already shows that we need to be more smarter with these plans and think about how much water is available, also considering the changes and climate change that's coming and a lot of things that are going on. So I think we need to get the ministries on board also to really reflect on what's happening and how much water is available and what this means for the plans that they have for the Litany River Basin.
Thanks. One last question in a minute, and that coming from Dr. Assam Ahmed. If a sheet number 1 reflects the other sheets from 2 to 6, how do you explain the difference between sheet number 1 and the rest of the sheets? I think he's mentioned the water accounting plus sheets.
They should be consistent, actually. So if there is an inconsistency, we actually need to validate and verify where that inconsistency comes from, because the numbers in one sheet should actually correspond to other numbers in another sheet. But for some cases, for instance, the water productivity, we only look at agricultural area. So those, and sometimes we just say, okay, we just look at the BK Valley. We don't look at all the irrigation, but just the BK Valley. So sometimes the total ET values might be different because we're looking at a different area compared to what we might present in sheet 1.
And one last question, it's coming from Dr. Tahani Slade. She's asking about your opinion about the use of water accounting plus on the Nile Basin. I think there were a previous application for the accounting plus on the Nile during your time at IMI. Is that correct?
Yes, and there's actually, so this Litany Basin, it's part of the series. And one of the other basins that we also analyzed was the Nile Basin. So you can actually find on the FAO website for the WAPO project, you can actually find also the report on the Nile Basin. But of course, that is much more challenging because it's got multiple countries, a lot of sub-basins, and a lot of activities going on. But there is a report on that on the Nile Basin.
Thanks, Marloes, for your insight and your fantastic presentation. And with that, I would like to invite Ms. Jolie Turity. She will talk to us about water governance. And Ms. Jolie she's the Director of Research at CNRS France, and she's teaching critical political ecology of water at the Paris School of International Affairs. She has over 25 years experience on water governance with PhD and HDR degree in political science with focus on water as well as 2 master degrees. Wow. All right. So, Mr. Jolie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much also to the other speakers who introduced water accounting. So I will try to build on what the speakers have said before me by extending this to what use do we make of water accounting to improve water governance. And I'd say the easy part is the water accounting. I'm trying to switch to the next slide.
Can you put the slide on the display, sure?
No, I've got it now. Do you see my second slide?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I'd like to take you to the case of Palestine to just have an idea of how complex looking at water governance can be. Here you see, for example, a wastewater treatment plant that was built thanks to donor funding in the West Bank. In principle, we should always rejoice when we see a wastewater treatment plant being built because cleaning water is always good for the environment. Now, once we build such a treatment plant, we often think we should reuse the treated wastewater, and that's where the problems arise, because what water accounting allows us to do is really look at water as a trajectory, and there are several types of trajectories we can think of. There's a spatial trajectory that water follows through space. There's the institutional trajectory water follows. That means the flow of water will be managed by different actors, different users along the way. And these, according to institutional rules that will vary. And very often we only have a very partial view of all of the institutions that will interact with the same water flow. And that is one of the main difficulties actually when we want to look at water governance and improve water governance. And finally, there's a sectoral flow, sectoral trajectory as well, because water will be used in different sectors along the way. So why am I showing you this wastewater treatment plant? Because I want you to think of what you're doing if you're now building a reuse project. Basically, that means you're going to direct water into a new spatial trajectory, meaning you're deviating it away from an initial trajectory. You're going to bring water, say, to farmers who want to irrigate further. Maybe that could be a good goal. But this treated wastewater used to flow into the environment. So where was it going before you have your reuse project? Maybe it was replenishing the well of the next village. Maybe it was replenishing a spring that was used elsewhere. You really have to consider the initial trajectory that water was following and the new trajectory your project would bring water into in order to assess whether the project is actually a beneficial project. Now, this is made very difficult by the fact that very often the initial institutional trajectory that water would have followed would involve informal institutions, would involve communal property regimes, very often institutions that have no written statutes and very often are not recognized in law. Palestine is not unique in this case. We have a lot of farmer organizations that manage spring water and irrigation well water, and although traditional rights have been recognized by the Palestinian water law since 2014, their institutions are not recognized. Their common property regimes are not recognized formally by the formal legislation. So it makes it very difficult to actually recognize see that they're existing along the spatial trajectory because they're not registered anywhere, for example. So let's look at, I'm trying to go to the next slide there. Are you seeing the new slide now? Dr.
Yes,
Amjad?
we do.
Okay,
yes,
right.
we do.
So this makes things very complex. For example, on the left here, you see a well that was drilled thanks to donor money in Ain Sanya well field to bring drinking water to Ramallah. And on the right, you see Aloja Spring, which is located very far in the east, 30 to 40 kilometers east of this well. And actually, what happened is that when this well was drilled, that you see on the left of the slide, the water was managed. The water abstracted by this well was managed according to a public property regime as a public good by the Palestinian Authority in conformity with the Palestinian water law. The spring on the right-hand side had been managed since the 19th century by a communal property regime set up by farmers that didn't have formal statutes, written statutes for their organization. And what happened was that this well probably interfered with the recharge of Aloja Spring, meaning that it's now become extremely unreliable. And by extremely unreliable, I mean 1 year it flowed only 18 days during the year. So this is a case where water accounting can be extremely useful. But when we want to build on this water accounting to try to understand how we can achieve good better water governance, what's made really difficult in a case like this one is that you have an institutional trajectory that means the water at the beginning of the flow is managed by a formal institution that's completely in line with the legislation, whereas the second institution managing water further downstream, aquifer-wise, is managed by an informal organization that is not the ministry, the Palestinian Water Authority. We have other cases. For example, here we see Ein Mishke Spring, which is completely dry now. The reason Ein Mishke Spring has disappeared is because so many unlicensed wells were drilled in the recharge area of the spring. Now, what this means is that a communal property regime that was quite old, that was managing the spring and was adhered to by the population, meaning there was a high social capital, has completely vanished as the spring has vanished. And those unlicensed wells that surround it actually access water in an unregulated fashion. So it's much more difficult to achieve good water management. But once again here, water accounting is a good first step, because with water accounting, we can actually establish why did the spring disappear. And this can be a first step for negotiations, actually, among all of the well owners and the water users. Negotiations are the key word, I think, for elaborating water governance, because we have many uses of water that in water accounting may be shrugged away as non-beneficial consumption. Charles explained very well the difference between beneficial consumption of water and non-beneficial consumption. And he explained that weeds, for example, represent a non-beneficial consumption. But many weeds are actually a staple food for poor people. Here we see khobeze, which is extremely nourishing, more nourishing than steak. And it's the staple food of poor people. When you have absolutely no money, you can always feed your children because you go pick khobeze. But khobeze can grow because there are leaks in the irrigation system. So this non-beneficial consumption of water is actually quite beneficial for some people. And this is part of what needs to be negotiated in order to go from straight water accounting into sound water management, water governance consideration. And that actually challenges also the notion of water productivity. Dr. Marlos explained very well the idea that water productivity can be improved. But when a farmer improves water productivity in their field, sometimes they will be tempted to simply cultivate more land instead of using less water. That's also something that needs to be addressed in water management. And actually, relying on sound water accounting gives you the quantitative assessments to be able to have a real negotiation and a real discussion. about this. And finally, I'd like to react to the question earlier about environmental flow requirements. We don't really have environmental flow requirements that are being implemented in the Palestinian case, because as I showed you, we have a lot of springs that are simply now completely dry, and there is even the Jordan River right now is benefiting from extremely low flow. But experience and research everywhere, whether in France or in other countries, shows that environmental flow requirements are always negotiated. So we can rely on hydrological assessments and calculations, but ultimately an environmental flow requirement is always the result of a political negotiation. So I don't know how many minutes I've spoken for.
You still have 3 minutes.
I still have 3 minutes. Okay, I make presentation very short because I could have gone on for a long, long time. Basically, if you look at the case of Palestine, there have been 3 fields where donors have been funding water infrastructure very much. The field of domestic water, the field of wastewater, and the field of agriculture. That has been the most neglected field. And most of the projects have gone into domestic water, either sinking wells or reducing leaks, restoring, upgrading drinking water networks. And what we have to bear in mind when we see all those projects is globally what they've done is they've reduced the recharge of the upper unconfined aquifer. And this upper unconfined aquifer is the one feeding the irrigation wells that are used by farmers according to common property regimes, and the springs that are used according to common property regimes as well by farmers. So the projects concerning wastewater are only really coming of age now. So far, the reuse projects that are planned are always planning to bring water to fields that had never been irrigated before. But these reuse projects could be directing water to wells and springs that have gone dry now. But which would allow those institutions to persist and farmers to keep farming as they used to. But the only way we could do that is if we accept to recognize all of the institutions that manage water, including the ones that are informal, that are grassroots, local ones, and that have not yet been fully recognized by the legislation. So I think that. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Jory, for that insight presentation. We have a few questions here. The first one, can you just define the water auditing and the concept of water governance?
I didn't understand. I didn't hear the question. Sorry, can you repeat?
Can you define the water auditing concept in terms of water governance?
Well, water auditing and water governance are 2 different things. The water auditing has been very well defined by Charles as a systematic quantitative assessment of the status and trends in water supply supply and demand. That's water accounting. So this gives you a quantitative basis that you can base the discussions on, the negotiations on. And water governance, there are many definitions of water governance, but the one that the FAO is using in its upcoming guidebook on water governance is not a normative concept. It's a political science concept where we recognize that many different actors will exert some control over management of water, and that if we want to, and all of them together, all of their interactions with the flows of water constitute overall the governance of water. So if we want to improve governance, we need to improve the harmony be in the actions of all of those different actors.
The following question here is coming from Marie-Hélène. She's asking about, from your experience, Dr. Julie, about the local use based on customer use or unregistered water use. For the example you have shown, did that always get missed in the water accounting, or it can be considered in the water accounting as it's not recognized by the government?
It needs to be recognized in the water accounting. Now, those farmers who use licensed wells and those farmers using springs, there's no problem recognizing them in the water accounting because since 2014, the Palestinian legislation recognizes traditional water rights. The problem that will subsist is with unlicensed wells because you should, as in principle, the law says you should get a license before you drill a well, and many wells have been drilled without a license. This is an issue. And so if you try to include those unlicensed wells in water accounting, you expose whoever has drilled this well to be fined. So it's very important for the Palestinian Water Authority to establish a policy towards those unlicensed wells that will mean that they won't hide away from a water accounting exercise. When we as researchers, whenever we interview people who use an unlicensed well, deontologically we can't even map their well on our computer because otherwise they could be found out, and that's not our role as researchers. We're trying to simply understand the situation. We're not from the police, you know, and so this is going to be a thorny issue, but that the Palestinian Authority can choose to approach all of those wells, saying if you participate in a water accounting, we can negotiate with you some kind of license. Maybe we'll ask you to pump less, but at least you would be recognized, so your status would become more secure. That is a one path that the Palestinian Water Authority could choose to go along. There's many other political solutions that they could contemplate.
Thanks, Dr. Jolie. And with that, we have concluded the presentation and now coming to our participatory discussions with our participants and also contribution from our panelists. So first of all, I would like to invite all panelists to stay with us, and if they can put their camera on, that would be great. And also for attendees, if you wanted to participate in the discussion, just raise your hand, and you can find that on your, based on the way you set up your screen, it should be on your right side. You can see a small hand where you can raise it, so I can take you and open the voice for you as well. And in the following 20 minutes, what we would like to discuss here is really the innovation to support the demand and supply side assessment for water accounting and auditing. And I would like to throw here the first question about innovations for our panel until we get our participants contribute with us. So the first question here, what innovation can we introduce to increase the reliability of data from ICT and remote sensing for also which data actually can progress and improve the water accounting. So maybe I can put that question to Margouz to talk about what data or what type of innovations we can actually use to introduce and improve the water accounting information.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it's a very relevant question because there's a lot of concern about the accuracy of remote sensing data and information. And we've done a number of studies using the VAPOR database, which works relatively well, but for some cases, for instance, the Jordan Basin analysis that we did, we also found that like the water balance at the basin level was also not closing. So I think in the next couple of years, we really need to look at what is the uncertainty of the data. And I think Charles also mentioned that in his presentation, that we need to understand that data and even observed data like rainfall data and even stream flow data, there is an error margin around it. And we need to identify what is the error margin and try to, make or create a community that can deal with these uncertainties. Because even if we know what happened in the last 20 years, with a number of digits behind the comma, it doesn't mean that in the next 30 years it's going to be exactly the same. So there's already an inherent uncertainty in terms of climate change, what's happening in the future. So we also need to think about the data and understand that there's also an uncertainty margin around it. What we need to find out is what is the margin? Is it 50% or is it 5%? And trying to see how we can still make decisions, understanding that there's an uncertainty in the data. So how do we make robust decisions based on this kind of data? So really analyzing and evaluating the remote sensing data and comparing different products. Like we also did a cross comparison with other remote sensing evapotranspiration products. So I think that's very important that you don't just use it, blindly and then assume that whatever number comes out of your model is accurate. No, we also need to evaluate whether or not this data is accurate and how much,
Thanks, Maruz. And if Dr. Poulad Karimi is with us, allow me to introduce him first before I throw the second question to him. So Dr. Poulad Karimi, he's a water resource and irrigation engineer for more than 12 years, and also with international experience in Asia and Africa. And the question I would like to put to Mr. Poulad is, which data from your experience actually having a progress in terms to support like the water accounting? So which data actually being approached by innovation and have some innovation solution behind it to support the water account?
Thank you very much, Amgad. May I ask clarification? Which data you mean, right? The data? Are we?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Like, for example, like evapotranspiration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, there's the whole idea of using remote sensing for water accounting is kind of, beside being able to conduct it, is also about being able to use the advances that are being made outside the core of water accounting. Basically, there are many groups around the world working on improving the different methods of data and also coming up with every day with the new data products. For instance, what VAPOR is offering, which has been around for past 3-4 years, is an opportunity to conduct water accounting over entire Africa. And this is just continuing. There's a VAPOR phase 2 that will continue providing that data for other places. Also, it's not the only data source that we have. You could use the efforts by USGS that are they are also providing maps of evapotranspiration globally. There are also other groups like OpenET initiative that is done again in the US. So there are a lot of different initiatives that are happening. But for us as the users, it's very important to kind of keep up to date with those, but also see what fits our purpose the best. Because all the global data sets, they have their own uncertainty level, and they kind of represent some situations better than the others. So best for us is to actually look into all of them and see what works for our own region, and then choose to work with that.
Thanks, Dr. Poulad. And with Mr. Charles, you have spoken about the water accounting supply and demand side. So where do you see the innovation for the supply side? Can we expect the use of more automated monitoring system to be able to get more data on the supply side?
Yeah, thanks, Amgad. Good question. Yeah, I think actually it's a very exciting time in terms of the both the remotely sensed data, but also ground-based data. I think that in recent years there's been a lot of advances in water meters. Also what it calls smart water meters and flow gauges. What's really interesting is that these in generally they're connected to cloud-based communication systems, so you can collect a lot of field data more easily, with at a lower cost. But I think it's this. So on the technology, I think there's a lot happening. I think, say on ET, the work of University of Cordoba with their ET station, which is, it's not only providing real-time ET estimation, but it's also a lot cheaper than a lot of the systems that have been sold in the last sort of 10, 20 years. So, but then, so I think technically there's a lot of innovations that can be. I think it's good to say it's to pick and choose and see how you can best use these innovations together. And I think there's a lot of this is looking at how to get the best cost benefit out of the systems which are selected. But just linking to Julie, I think there's also there's the technical advances, but I think also the citizen science concept has now become a lot more accepted by the technical people that I work with, and they do respect the data that are collected by citizen scientists and value it, because it does often provide insights that are missed by the scientists. Maybe just last point, just draw attention to the work of Jeff Davids, who's been doing some working for FAO, and he's been taking citizen science very seriously in the work that he's been doing in Asia, and it's an example, I think, to us all. Thank you. That's all for me.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. And before I go to Julie, I just would like to remind our participant again, if you can't raise your hand, you can actually use the chat box and add your question, and we'll use the panel to address those questions as well. So with that, Julie, like you have spoken about the water governance and the case for water reuse. So if we look from the innovation perspective, so what innovation can we expect to see in the social engagement and co-management to support the water auditing or water governance analysis for sustainable water use?
Well, as Charles has already mentioned, citizen science is something that could really be explored. With citizen science, that means we rely on voluntary participation, for example, a well user or well owner to measure himself the level of water in the well, for example, and report it. Now, this can work when there's a high level of trust, because if the person thinks, if I report the correct amount of water, for example, then they will slash the quantity I can use. Or if I take more than I'm supposed to take, then I'm going to claim that I'm taking less, right? So citizen science can be extremely useful, but then we have to work at having a high level of trust, which in the area I work in isn't really existing at the moment, because I work in Palestine, so it's still under military occupation, and so you never know when a jeep with soldiers is going to come and pour cement down your well because they found out it was an unlicensed well, and then you've just lost 60,000 shekels investment. If you're a farmer, that's an awful lot of money. And so I think I really believe in citizen science. But at the same time, we have to have social we have to have a lot of innovation and building social capital to build trust. And to me, one way among many would be to work with schools. Because if teachers always teach the water cycle to their students, well, you can ask every kid to have a pluviometer outside their house and register and record how much rain is falling throughout the year. If you do that with all of the schools over an entire territory, you can have a fine-grained understanding of the rainfall over the country. That's something that should be doable, for example. And yes, there will be an error in the measurements, but there's also, as Marlos was explaining, there's also an error margin in the assessments, for example, from remote sensing of evapotranspiration. So we just have to factor in this error margin.
Thanks, Jolie. That's really a great point with the citizen science. And that made me really to put that question. And I think for the time, I will put that question for all panel and then ask for a quick comment from everyone. So we have been talking about innovation to serve the water accounting. So how we see the role of innovation to actually disseminate the information from water accounting and make it more accessible, more informing, not just to the decision maker, but even our citizens, our farmers, our end user of that information. So I will ask first Maruz to give a quick comment.
Yeah, well, I think, the last 10 years with everybody having a smartphone, you can have, the information at your fingertips. So how to get, all these huge clouds of data into, the information that a farmer needs or somebody on the ground needs. So I think, the development of applications and the use of smartphones, I think that's really something, that we can take much further and we can make use of it. I think the main challenge is how do we compress, all the amount of information into something that's useful for the end user.
Thanks, Maruz. Quick comment from Charles.
Yes, I mean, I guess smartphones as well, I guess. I think, in terms of applications, definitely, but also interactive visualizations. I think, we've got to move away from PowerPoints and have ways of communicating, often quite complex bits of information, and I think that's best done by visualizations that people can interrogate and they can run different scenarios on.
Thanks, Charles. And Dr. Jolie.
Well, following in that direction, I think an interactive process whereby people who want to collect information can also bring information would probably be the most successful. If somebody, for example, a lot of farmers I know who are very small farmers have used CropWatt, and they tell me, it's not really accurate. Actually, the best irrigation calendar I can use is not the one that CropWatt is providing. Well, if we transform those software into participatory software, a bit like QGIS is a participatory software where users can bring and improve the knowledge base, I think that would be the most useful. But there are many pitfalls because you could have people actually bringing disingenuous information, and that I don't know how to deal with that.
Thanks, Dr. Joy. And final words from Dr. Vlad, as coming from an engineering background, how we can actually take the water accounting information with the digital innovation platform to bring it to the next step of level of use.
That's a very good question, the final one. I like that. Basically, the biggest part of it is that as a community, we have to listen to the users, right? I mean, that's the only way we can bridge this gap. So basically, by understanding what are the needs by different users, that could be the public, the decision makers, the policy makers, etc. Understanding those would be crucial. And then once we understand that, we can also go back now and see what kind of tools we have. As Charles said, one of the very important aspects is that we can visualize this data in a way that it becomes more accessible and comprehensible by the users. So that role of digital innovation there is very important. And also it would help us to also be coming up with better and more accurate assessment to answer some of the uncertainty questions that there is. So I think as a collective, we have to work quite a bit. It's a very good initiative. We have to open up as we are and listen, get the feedback, improve, and convey the message again. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Poulad. I think we are doing great on time. And now coming to the inputs from Dr. Muhammad Al-Hamdi to give us a reflection from the NENA Water Scarcity Initiative. Dr. Muhammad Al-Hamdi is a senior land and water officer and the delivery manager of the Regional Water Scarcity Initiative at the FAO Regional Office for Near East and North Africa. He contributes to FAO efforts supporting countries of the region in the area of sustainable water resource management, with focus on intersectoral policy, coherence, and water productivity, water accounting, non-conventional water, among others, which is very relevant for what we are discussing. Dr. Muhammad Al-Hamdi, the floor of yours.
Thank you, Dr. Amjad, and thank you for the excellent facilitation of the session. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. And also thank you to all the presenters for their excellent presentations and their excellent interventions. Let me start by saying that my reflections will go a little beyond the direct scope of water accounting. So just to put things in a broader perspective. Let me start by stating the obvious. The region with very high population growth will face higher water demands. And this, coupled with climate change impacts on precipitation, will force a change in the water allocation regime, be it formal allocation or informal allocation, water allocation regime. And here, agriculture would be really the weak link because it is the largest using sector, and also water use has traditionally been viewed to be inefficient. So, how would agriculture cope with this? Because more water will be reallocated from agriculture to other sectors, and the case of Jordan, for example, is an example where new fresh water for agriculture is only coming from treated water. It's not, the agriculture would not receive fresh water for agriculture. So this will become the norm in the coming years, and agriculture will have to cope by being more water efficient and also demonstrate higher water productivity. It will also need, agriculture would need as a sector to demonstrate its contribution to unseen benefits and rural development, rural employment, social stability. I mean, the COVID-19 pandemic has shown that agriculture is a resilient sector. And unfortunately, agriculture is always viewed and judged by the contribution of GDP to the economy. And I think we need to move a little bit away from that. So that is the first point. I'll move to water productivity. We need higher productivity, and sometimes, in many cases, it's viewed as a policy option to face water scarcity. But unless in our region, specifically in our countries, unless this is controlled by sustainability elements of the resource base, it might be counterproductive. More income to farmers will promote expansion, and that will induce more water demand. So it's not really the magic solution unless there is a system that caps consumption on the basis of the limits of the resource base. And in Australia, for example, we've heard that they've done this successfully. So we need to learn from that. Water productivity is needed, but governed and controlled by sustainability dimensions. The importance of water accounting as an assessment tool is really important because it helps bridge the science policy interface. So water accounting as such can improve decisions, improve strategies, help in strategic planning of water resources, especially in a water scarce region like ours. And but to do that, we really need to have capacity. We cannot rely always on expats and outsiders to always come and do this. We really need to build critical mass of capacity at the national level. And in the Water Scarcity Initiative, through our CEDA project, we're doing this. We're helping countries, we're helping to build this critical mass of technical capacity within the countries so as to inform decision making and inform better strategic planning of water management. I want to stress the one point that has been raised during the discussion, which is that water accounting as a methodology needs to be accompanied by an assessment of the overall governance framework, looking at the institutional, legal, policy. So it was referred to as water auditing. We need to do that hand in hand alongside with water accounting in order to have a full picture and in order to really reflect water accounting on the institutional and policy setting. Otherwise, it's just going to be a technical exercise of capacity building that does not reflect or has no reflection on water management. Moving to the next point, we at the Water Scarcity Initiative are promoting a community of practice. In addition to what we've been doing in capacity building and also working with the countries, we're promoting a community of practice on water accounting and water auditing. And we're aiming by doing so to share knowledge and exchange lessons learned among other objectives as well. So I would like my colleague, maybe Jiro, can put the link in the chat for those who are interested to join in that community of practice. On what we at FAO has been doing on water accounting in particular, we've had an extensive capacity building at national and regional levels with a lot of physical as well as webinars and online courses on water accounting. And not only on the concept, but also the application of the methodology in the 8 countries that the project is active. We're also promoting the institutionalizing of water accounting within the structure of water organizations. For example, here at the ministry, they have institutionalized a water accounting unit, and we're promoting that in the different countries. We're also engaging the multidisciplinary teams of the Water Scarcity Initiative at the country level with the discussions and the activities relating to water accounting. And we're hoping that this will improve strategic planning, will enhance policy development, and inform decision making. What is in the pipeline? What are we having next, particularly through the project? We would like to work out and propose water accounting systems tailored for the reality of the different countries. There is no one system that fits all, and I think this has come also during the comments. We really need to look at the specificities of the different countries and work accordingly. And this will be done through training, coaching of the national teams, and also based on field evidence. We're also looking to focus more on water auditing and governance and analysis through regional training activities. With this, I conclude my points, and I don't know, we still have a few minutes. Maybe Dr. Amjad, you can also solicit some additional comments or questions before we close, I would like to indicate that Dr. Iman, who opened this the session, is the sector head of planning at the ministry. She had to leave the meeting because she was called for an important meeting with the minister. So if we can have for the remaining 5 more minutes additional comments from the panelists, after that we can close. Back to you, Dr.
Thanks, Dr. Muhammad, for this insightful reflection, where you have managed to bring in every aspect has been discussed under the water scarcity initiative. I'm glad to see that happening. And I think before I recall you for formally closing the session, I would like also to ask Gio to bring in the second poll for all participants. So we have over 100 participants. So I would like to invite each participant to address that. And in the meantime, we'll go through the questions in the chat box. So there is a nice question here from Dr. Radi Darwish. He's asking about what we are trying to govern. Increase water allocation efficiency among all users, or people behavior in efficiently using the water. So I think that question could be for Jolie.
Thank you. That's a very good question. I think what we are trying to govern is a sustainable governance of water, because at the moment, in many places, actually everywhere I've been working, we were not doing a sustainable management of the resource. We were either polluting aquifers or we were emptying aquifers faster than they were replenishing. Or we were degrading them. And the idea is to try to have ideally is to reach an agreement among all of the users of water that will allow sustainable management of water, which means that most people will not be maximizing the utility they would wish to draw from water. It would necessarily be a compromise among users, actually.
The second question here from Dr. Assam Nova again. So he highlighted the importance of water accounting to enhance the perception of the value of water at the policy and decision-making process, and also highlight the importance of water auditing in terms of understand the trajectories. But what he's asking here, what we do actually to avoid the confusion about the terminology, especially auditing and governance. So I think I can quickly take that. So with the framework that FAO is putting for piloting, we try to redefine the water auditing as a water governance analysis, where we look at all the governance in terms of the formal and informal rules, and also the organizations within the political economy setting for the region. So based on the focus problem, you look at all the formal and informal organization setting and rules and regulations and policy exist, but also you look at the political economy setting for that particular problem. So if the problem is water allocation, you treat it in that way. So in a simple way, water auditing could be equal water governance analysis. I think with that, we coming to close time, and allow me to re-invite again Dr. Muhammad Al-Hamdi to formally close the session. And thanks everyone. Dr. Muhammad, please.
Thank you, Dr. Amjad, and I again thank you for your excellent facilitation, moderation of this session. Thanks to all the presenters. It's been really eye-catching. It has a depth in the discussions, and we could not hope for anything more. I mean, the substance was there, and we covered almost everything that we wanted to cover in this session. Thank you to all the presenters. Thank you for the audience for raising all the questions. And I think we will have the opportunity to meet again virtually or in person in the coming days, because this issue of water accounting, water productivity will continue to be a focal point, not only within FAO agenda, but I think within the agenda of all those working on water in the region. So thank you again, and I wish you a pleasant afternoon. And with this, I close this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.
Okay. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Yeah, goodbye. Thank you.
Mr. Gio?
Yes.
Would you please, okay, you give him the most back. Thank you so much. Thank you.